-2. Okay. Tonight, we're happy to have Richard Terrill and Patricia Barnes as our featured readers. Richard will read first. Richard is the author of Essentially, Essays, a book that has just been published, and he has his launch parties scheduled for his hometown of Minnesota, of Minneapolis. He's also the author of What Falls Away Is Always, Poems and Conversations. Both these books are from Holy Cow Press. He has 5 previous books: Coming Lake to Rachmaninoff, which won the Minnesota Book Award for Poetry; Saturday Night in Baoding, a China memoir, which won the Associated Writing Program's Award for Nonfiction. He's been awarded fellowships from the National Endowment for the Arts, the Wisconsin and Minnesota State Arts Boards, the Jerome Foundation, the McDowell Colony, and the Bread Loaf Writers Conference, as well as 3 Fulbright fellowships. He gets around. His work has appeared in such journals as Iowa Review, Georgia Review, North American Review, New Letters, Fourth Genre, and Crazy Horse. He's a professor emeritus at Minnesota State University, Mankato, where he was the distinguished faculty scholar. And currently, he works as a jazz saxophone player. He's with a combo that is making the rounds in his region and elsewhere. He lives in Minneapolis. Welcome, Richard Terrill.
Thank you. Thanks, Ed, and thanks to all of you for coming and for inviting me. I co-host a very similar reading series here in Minneapolis. There are 4 of us who alternate. We were on Zoom for a couple of 2 or 3 years, and now we've had the courage to go back live. I'm not sure it's any better, but I'm pretty familiar with this kind of format and audience. So I'm going to read from the 2 most recent books. The first, the book of poems, What Falls Away Is Always, Poems and Conversations, and then from excerpts from some essays. And I'd like to start with a couple poems about Americans, 2 Americans who are quite different, Edward Hopper and John Coltrane. And the first, it's called On Edward Hopper, and it's unabashedly one of those poems that's about paintings. And you probably know Hopper's work. On Edward Hopper. It's not so much that he's looking at nothing, but that there is nothing to look at, and we see it too. A style that purports to show how gas pumps in a line raise their heads and weak shoulders above a solitary man in shirt sleeves. How on Sunday another man can sit on a boardwalk outside buildings awash in gold. He looks like an ex-boxer, gartered sleeves, bald, forearms resting on thighs. Otherwise, people are extraneous. Cafe patrons study their teacups. Women, nudes, stand looking into severe light, the source of which we may severely misunderstand. 3 mannequins in conference gather as if human, merely because one of them can kink an arm into a gesture. And a buxom one can stand so straight that her cupped hands seem to betray a desire for prayer. All the other tables, all the sidewalks, and the thoroughfare are not so much empty as filled with space, and with the hoods, excuse me, of monstrous cars, the long backs of divans, the high roofs and gables, the black pupils of paired windows looking out to what must be the sea. John Coltrane, by all accounts, excuse me, I was at a book club today and I talked all afternoon. It was a mistake. By all accounts, John Coltrane was a very gentle man, unlike his music towards the end of his career, which was really quite the opposite of that. This is one of those nonfiction poems. Everything in it is true and from a source. And the poem, Coltrane, as you may or may not know, died very young. He was only 40. And the poem imagines what his life might have been like had he lived a full life. Coltrane. He liked to laugh, didn't smile on album covers only because his teeth were bad. Once there were so many waiting in line, he took tickets at his own gig so the doorman could catch a break to pee. He was shy, and if you weren't, he just agreed with you. Journalists came away writing about themselves. He said, "Sometimes I wish I could walk up to my music as if I had never heard it before." He asked, "Did you like it? Did you really think I played well?" Imagine him among the galaxies like light, bending gently through time. Sorry. Einstein knew about that early, but kept it to himself. Or imagine him earthbound, breathing the very air you later would. Then see him instead, almost 90, tending his garden, hoeing red potatoes, sweet as kept promises, dragging his rusted implements, lacquer worn away to essential beauty, gently over the loose soil, which is also sweet to the small animals living there and who can hear him hum in the chord's upper structure. See him maybe leave the yard, still too soon, as if it didn't matter, as if all the world weren't there. I'm going to mute myself for a second. You can talk amongst yourselves and see if I can get rid of this scratchy throat. I'm going to read two poems about animals. And the first, I wanted to make sure that one of us read something tonight that was silly. And this is silly, I hope, in the tradition of Theodore Roethke's nonsense poems, or his poems about animals, if you know those. And this poem is a formal poem. It's a double dactyl. And you'll recognize the rhythm. It's like Higgly Piggly, Ludwig van Beethoven, here's my Fifth Symphony, da-da-da-dum. You know, that kind of rolling thing. Only this is the Terrill dactyl. And I'm punning on the flying dinosaur, the pterodon, the pterodactyl. So this is the Terrill dactyl. And the poem starts with an epigraph from a book called The Hot-Blooded Dinosaurs. You have to just love that title. And it says, "It is difficult to understand how pterodon stood on land. Probably it propped its body off the ground by resting on its knuckles. The pterodactyl, he flies over tar pits, Cretaceous oceans, and lands gracefully at the local saloon, where dinosaurs network and crocodiles congregate, pre-beings howl at what will be the moon. Batbird or dragon man, flying marsupial, swimmer in ancient seas, just plain nice guy. Paleontologists couldn't agree if his wing finger meant he got mud in his eye. Marvelous endotherm, high order vertebrate, so unreptilian, so debonair. Gentle, interrogant, intricate pterosaur, spent his adult life all gliding in air. Only the ground ever gave him a problem. He rests on his knuckles and sips on his drink. For dinosaurs are a convenient reminder that someday the rest of us will be extinct." So, silliness. Here's another poem about animals. I am a musician, and we do a cover this time of year of The Little Drummer Boy, the Christmas carol. And, you know, there's a line in there that says the ox and lamb kept time. And I always wondered, if the ox and lamb kept time, why did they need the little drummer boy? I mean, the animals were doing perfectly fine without him because they kept time. So here's a poem about that. And I kind of extend the metaphor to the rest of the world, I guess. The ox and lamb kept time, little drummer boy. And so it came to pass in those days that the animals were musical. Their cloven hooves, caked hard in mud and waste, could thump a hollow sound at a steady pace on the barn floor, muted in straw. They never rushed, never dragged against the steady progress of their beat, which was music to the heavens. It was only human that the animals, minders and tenders, shepherds, stable boys, thought they themselves played the principal instruments, whether pipes in the field or the drum of a child in a song taken to be true. For the humans in those times, as now, saw themselves at the celestial center, a kingdom that rules the kingdom of beasts. Wise men with gifts, angels on harps and strings, may or may not have been present in the scene, depending on your level of belief. But the lambs and the oxen, they are unquestionable, beyond symbol, beyond faith. It was a barn. We know they were there, keeping time steady, inalterable, out of reach of human hands that shaped and misshaped the very planet to which all children are born, holy or not, on that night or any other. The carols are wrong. It is the flocks that kept watch by night, who by instinct maybe felt a pulse we cannot feel, and by their presence tell us we are not the masters. So one more poem. It's a poem that I wasn't going to put in the collection because I thought it was too sentimental. I thought it was just too nice, too pretty. And I put it in, and wouldn't you know that Garrison Keillor read it on the Writer's Almanac, which for a Minnesotan, you know, that's a big deal. So I guess I'm glad I put it in. It's short. Blackberries. They lie on the ground after the deer have left, after the bear has had her fill. They lie under the stars and under the sun in a cloud of brambles. The ripest ones fall first, become black jam in the thatch. Late August, school about to open, the aspen would rattle in a saving breath. As a boy, I hated picking blackberries, the pail never full, like one half of a slow conversation. Now, their taste is sweeter in memory. The insect buzz, the branches too high, the blue summer never quite over before the fall begins. So I posted on Facebook that, you know, I wasn't going to put the poem in the book. And my friend said, no, you should write more poems like that instead of the snarky, sarcastic things that you usually write. So we'll see, maybe I will. So this book of essays, essentially, and it's about music, which I guess is one of my signature subjects through several books, and about the outdoors. And for me, they're sort of spiritually two halves of the same thing. As the book progresses, it becomes more and more a book about aging. So I'm going to read one short essay that's about the outdoors, and then some excerpts that are about music, and aging kind of pops up in both of them, here and there. This is called The World Away, and it's about canoeing in the Quetico Wilderness, which is that Canadian half of the boundary waters in Minnesota. And I think I made 16 trips there in 15 years when I was a bit younger, going into late middle age. And this essay starts in the middle of a sentence, which is something I always wanted to do. And so it starts with an ellipses. It drove the designer nuts to get it the way I wanted it. The world away. Nor are we tempted to sing praises of the beauty of portages, like the long one along the Basswood River called the Horse Portage. According to our outfitter, before the boundary waters in Quetico were the large wilderness parks they are today, loggers did indeed use horses to haul equipment on this 1.25 mile long trail. You feel like a horse or a Spartan slave doing the horse portage. And if, like us, you're not hefty enough to carry both a pack and a canoe in the same trip, you cross each portage 3 times, there and back and there again. So a 1.25 mile portage like this one becomes nearly a 4-mile walk, 2/3 of it under the weight of what you foolishly thought you had to bring on your canoe trip. I start such portages feeling fresh and confident, finish them feeling thirsty, sore, and overmatched. It always seems to be raining on a portage, or it has rained and the trail is slick rock and deep puddles. Being young or in outstanding physical condition should not be allowed in this wilderness. Those who fit that description can never know how good a cold swim feels in the evening after such work that you're not in shape for. They can't know the numbing taste of the first sip of rum at night, or how much more silent silence is when you've been humbled by your middle-aged body. Consider the different varieties of silence this far back in the woods. The water caught in your ears after a cold swim, the sky when you're the first one out of the tent in the morning, the bits of time between cries of loons on opposite ends of the lake, and those times on the water or around a late fire when no one talks because no one needs to talk. There is so much sacred here that it's hard to keep a list short enough to read. Portaging should also keep you from being too proud, too ambitious, keep you from thinking the trees and water 40 miles in look a lot different from the trees and water 20 miles in. They're different, but are they different enough to be worth all the misery? My wife Linda ventured with me and my pal Schmitty and his wife to the Quetico on a brief summer trip one year. Linda found the setting as beautiful as I did, but wondered, with one lake seemingly as good as the next, why we bothered to portage at all. It's a fair question. The answer may be that we're all on some kind of portage in the Quetico and beyond. This is an idea so corny, so obviously symbolic as to almost have to be true. We all schlep things, packs, the food we need to eat, the shelter we need to stay out of the rain. We also bear crosses in life. In between the varied experiences of our excursions, the scenery we see going by in life, there has to be this drudgery that turns muscles and tendons to salty twine. Drudgery looking at its own feet. I have all the character I need, thanks, and this won't build any more. We're always walking between 2 lakes, the known lake of the present and the unknown lake that's next, and which is always more beautiful because you haven't seen it yet. That is the world away from the known world, the next world that awaits. Only in, excuse me, only in life we don't know what portage we're on, do we? Doubt is natural, meaning it's part of nature, stupid. From the canoe, we look for and find the lowest spot in the tree line that marks the beginning of the portage trail. We pull up to a beach or rocky inlet. Maybe a stream or marsh is off to one side, flowing or draining from this lake to the next. We unstrap our gear from the boats and pile it off the trailhead in case someone else should traverse by in the other direction. We wouldn't want to obstruct or delay the other parties, leaving us alone. We strap the packs on our backs, grab paddles, life preservers, and set off. There's usually just one path, so we simply get out of the boat and start our routine. We might begin to count our steps and could be forgiven for that. We don't know how long before we can set all this stuff down and just look at the trees. Someone else, maybe many people have made this trail, this trial, maybe a parent with a child, or maybe the whole of human history, but probably nothing that dramatic. We just trust that finally we'll find ourselves on another lake. My childhood, as I choose to remember it, was spent in the outdoors, and it resides happily there now. The lost promise that was made to me and to all North Americans was made in the outdoors. What Nick Carraway in The Great Gatsby called the fresh green breast of the New World. If we can set aside Fitzgerald's biased coloring of landscape as female and violet, we're left with the idea that there is something that precedes humanity and is far greater than what humans are and what humans do, even though we don't know exactly what that something is. My friend Schmitty is having a smoke and taking a few casts at the shore once we've set up camp, and I join him down there for a respite. He says the minute before I came down the path, a family of ducks came out of the water, the mother and the line of ducklings heading off into the woods. Where the hell were they going, he wonders. Maybe, I say, they were just trying to get away from you. Maybe, he answers, and then a pause like a sigh. We stare at the water and the air. Tree pollen is floating all directions in the breeze, the trees backlit by long sun. Sometimes I think all of this beauty here, and how 95% of the time, there's no one here to see it, Schmitty says. Exactly as it should be, I answer. I'm going to stop for a brief commercial here and just this. There we are. So these two books, What Falls Away Is Always, essentially, you can get them at Holy Cow Press. You can go to my website and send me a message and we'll work something out. Or, of course, your favorite independent bookstore. I know in Ann Arbor, there are some good ones. I lived there back in the 80s. So there's that. One more, some excerpts. I think I'm okay on time, I hope. And this is an essay called On Hearing, On Listening. It's very long. It's one of those fragmented essays, so I can read. Maybe I should just do a couple parts, and it's somewhat satisfying. Like a lot of musicians, I have a mild to moderate hearing loss, and that's in here. But I'm not going to read those parts because that's sort of plot. So instead, I'll read the first and last segments. On hearing, on listening. At 65, I'm usually the youngest in the band. We play the oldest of old standards, very little from after the war, plus novelty tunes, blues. The most senior player is a trumpeter who, even if you ask him, won't give his age. I don't ask. The trumpet is a very physical instrument, and Stan confessed to me once that he never practiced. The band leader introduces him as having that fat New Orleans sound, which I thought is likely a result of him being as old as he is and never practicing on the most unforgiving of horns. It all depends on what you mean by fat. Stan is a sweet man. He's also a good musician. He seldom looks at a chart, always offers me his chart if the leader calls a tune I don't know. Stan doesn't need to look at the music. Stan can hear everything, except Stan can no longer hear very well. In our pleasant conversations on breaks, I can see Stan's eyes reading my lips. Sometimes his responses to me are non sequiturs that seem to change the subject. We're talking about a player he likes, then we're talking about a good movie he just saw. He wears a hearing aid in each ear, but these little machines are notoriously ineffective when the background noise is as thick as it usually is in a lively bar when the band is on break. Most of the time, Stan does fine. And when Stan hits the right notes, the bluest notes, the audience loves him. Like most audiences, of course, they listen with their eyes. Their eyes hear only this round and sweet man of indeterminate age seated behind his trumpet, as if it's an extra, somewhat awkward appendage. They can see he's having a good time, and thus so are they. One time on a simple blues, Stan is playing his solo, the bell of his horn in the air angled over his unneeded music stand, as if he's emptying the last of a sweet liquid into his mouth. He has that fat sound, the notes splotch and settle on pitch. Problem is, those right notes fall clearly into a key other than the one in which the rest of the band is playing. The bass player, who like Stan has an ear that I admire, looks puzzled for a bar or two, then catches my eyes and we both smile. Now the guitar player hears, and the singer. Stan plays on. Every note a good note, a right note, if only the rest of the band were wrong. Then after Stan's chorus, the singer comes in spot on in the key we thought we'd all agreed to. I know Stan always listened. What I'll go to my grave dying to know is, when Stan played that chorus in the wrong key, what did the rest of the band sound like to him? What did he sound like to himself? And what did the two have in common? What notes did they share? Now, the last section. My dog, Zachy, is partly deaf like me. He's 14, which is 72 in Bashan years, a website tells me. We're the oldest of buddies, and our lives run in these pleasing parallels, if at a slower pace than 10 years before. It was maybe 5 years ago that I was hurrying my drive home from work because I knew a cut from my band's new CD was going to be spun on the local jazz station. This is a different band, actually. When I come in the door, Zachy was excited to see me and not aware the reason for my haste was something other than being anxious to see him. I petted him quickly and sat back in the chair next to the radio in the dining room. Zachy jumped in my lap and settled in for a nap with his head on my thigh, content. The jazz station was in the middle of a public service announcement, yada, yada, yada. I didn't know what cut from our CD they'd play, but then it started. We did Night and Day by Cole Porter with a Latin beat. I started with an unaccompanied melody on tenor sax. Those first two notes, 2/8 and a dotted half on concert G. Night and day, and then You Are the One. Zachy is a companion dog, and chief among the pursuits of his day are eating, sleeping, and seeing what I'm up to in various parts of the house. He will venture down to my basement practice studio, nudge open the door with his little nose, and see and hear me making that sound on the big yellow saxophone. It must seem very loud to him, and I suppose rather pointless. He may be right about the pointless part. So when he's sure I'm not up to anything important, he will about face and scoot up the stairs. But that's backstory. In this moment I'm telling you about, I'm in the antique dining room chair, beer opened, shoes off, dog in my lap. The DJ cues us up and talks us in. Those first three notes, night and day. And then the little miracle. Zachy's head pops upright from his deep repose, his posture at the ready, his attention wrapped around the moving elements, that concert G on the tenor saxophone. He recognized it. He knew the sound of his master's voice coming through that golden tube, that useless contraption with the conical bore, producing that music we all are made of. Loving me as a good dog must, he couldn't help but listen. The tones were packed away in the part of the brain reserved for familiar sound. And in the next moment or two, I knew they would always be there without regard to dynamics or tone color, volume or pitch. The ineffable, internalized sound of coming home, or the sound of waiting, maybe not so patiently, of knowing everything, anytime, of night or day, would be just all right. Knowing without sound, without saying or being told, you are the one. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard.